going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's Open Championship and everything you need to know about Royal Portrush to get your process started, whether it's our DFS, betting, the prop side of things. We're going to touch on everything you need to know from that side, including a hole-by-hole breakdown, my modeling and key stats that I'm using to identify any top plays, and some comp courses on top of that too. So strap on in. The next 10 minutes are going to be super informative, and let's get this thing rocking. First thing you got to know about this course is that it is a true link style setup, and while the Renaissance Club, if you were watching the Scottish Open, was pretty close to it, this is as linksy as you could possibly get. I'm talking massive sand dunes all over the track, wildflowers instead of rough around here, and greens that have a whole bunch of undulation. So some punch bowl effects, some that repel shots like we had at Pinehurst. A great setup, a great strategic kind of golf course as well that almost always gives us a deserving champion. So in terms of some of the course specifics, we got a par 71, same exact setups we had in 2019, a little bit longer this time around, so just under 7,400 yards, and in particular a hole like 4 that was almost already 500 yards to begin with is now over 500 yards. So I would say length, especially if it's a rainy week, could be a pretty big factor. Next up, we've got fescue from tip to toe, which is the same type of agronomy we had at the Scottish Open. That is typical of almost all of these courses in this part of the world. Worth noting that the rough is only listed at 2 inches long, but you do have some spots around this course, just like at the Renaissance Club, that has extremely long fescue. Gorse bushes, for example, that can lead to lost balls. So though the primary rough isn't going to be that substantial, all of that other stuff is what you have to worry about. And it's not even just the rough, the wildlife, the bushes that can cause you trouble, but there's plenty of out of bounds around this golf course too, which we'll point out when we go hole by hole. Next up, we've got the greens, which are fescue, as I mentioned, but about 5,500 square foot. So not the largest greens. They also have a lot of runoff areas, as you saw at the Renaissance Club as well. Only 2 water hazards on this golf course though, and there's not always even water that are running through those, so you can play out of them at times. They're more burns than anything, but this golf course is pretty similar to St. Andrews in that aspect, where it's all about the pot bunkers, the undulation on the greens, the firmness of that linked soil that defends it. And on top of that, you also get a lot of weather that defends these Open Championship venues. And the last time we played here in 2019, the weather was pretty pristine for the first 3 days. It got nasty in round 4, and that's why the scoring average ballooned even after the cut line. But if we get some wind and some rain at this golf course for this event, it could play extremely difficult. So when we go over to the averages, this was from the last time we were at Royal Portrush. The averages are still harder than your PGA Tour average, but keep in mind it could be even more difficult this time around if the weather isn't as pristine. So you can see the scrambling rate was only about 50%. That shows you the kind of speed and the undulation and the really difficult shots when you miss the greens that you get around this course. And once again, that was a year that was playing maybe a little bit easier. Green regulation rate was relatively high, so that was mostly due to the wind staying down. But even with that, you had a lower than normal birdie average, only 2.91 per round. And as a par 71, it does have 3 par 5s. So, interesting to see that it still was below that 3 mark, even with all of those in play. Bogey average was also well above your tour average at about 3.3 per round. And pretty much no matter which metric you're looking at, it's going to be either slightly or significantly harder than what we're used to seeing, which, at Open Championships becomes the kind of standard that we're used to seeing. And when we go hole by hole here, you'll get a real sense for how tight this course can play. So hole 1 is infamous for being what derailed Rory the last time around. He's from the area. He has a 61 at this golf course as a junior. The reason why he didn't make the cut last time is he made an 8 on this hole in the first hole. So there's out of bounds to the left, just left of this little line you can see there. And then on the right side, just right of this little white staked line is another out of bounds line. So you're going to see almost everyone taking an iron off this tee unless you're extremely confident in hitting that driver and keeping it online. I have seen some people, like I watched Wesley Bryan, Grant Horvat play this hole. They took driver and they were okay. They were able to get it past this bunker on the right. But I think most players are going to choose to take an iron off of that tee. And this green is raised up. You can't really see all the undulations from these overhead views, but this routinely plays as one of the hardest holes around this golf course, and it was over par all 4 rounds in 2019. Hole 2 is a reachable par 5. It's going to play longer than it says here, though. So they did add a tee box, I believe, right about where my cursor is now. That makes it closer to about 580 yards. This hole, though, if it's not reachable in 2, it's still a decent birdie look because a lot of your players are going to get it past this bunker grouping here and have a flip wedge in. So if you can make a birdie here, right, rectify any sort of mistake you made on the first, or even if you made par on the first, birdie on the second, be -1 through 2, that's the kind of start that a lot of your elite tier players are looking for. Next up, you have the shortest par 3 on this course, and that's 175 yards. You can't see all the undulations on these greens, but it is not as straightforward as it might look from these overhead views. And this is the shortest that the par 3s get. So when we talk about the approach profile, our key stats later on, it's going to be a lot of the long irons because you're hitting them on well over half the shots. Next up, we have 4, which is going to be even longer this year. So they added a tee box back here that makes it about 500 yards. And this is a hole with out of bounds down the right. So it's already a long par 4. The green here is also in a little bit of a bowl, which could help you, right? You can hit these little dunes and end up onto the green. But if you miss on the wrong side of the dunes, you have a blind shot onto the green. So good luck with that. But there's a hedge down the right here, which could lead to lost balls. And then, of course, if you go over that hedge, you're hitting a brand new tee shot for 3. So just a brutal hole will play as one of the top 5, top 6 most difficult holes. And you have 2 of those in the first 4 on the course. Hole 5, though, is a very birdieable hole. In fact, Shane Lowry birdied this in all 4 holes when he won, and it's drivable. So you can see they have it at 280 over here, but pretty much everyone in the field, other than maybe some of the old senior tour guys, are going to have the length to take on this green. It's only 290 to about where the cursor is now, and because it's link soil, even if it's raining, everything is going to bounce up onto the screen, or at least around the green complex. So it's an up and down for birdie for most players in the field. I do have to say, though, that this lane to the right that you have to carry to get it to that spot is treacherous. So if it's playing into the wind, or if you have some sort of maybe a mishit off the tee, could be a little bit of a problem there. Next up, we have 6, which is 192 yards. That is going to be another longer par 3, which you can't really see the sloping, but that's what makes these longer par 3s. And in front of this is a massive false front. So most players, especially the front pin locations, will be the hardest that we get here at this hole, just because if you miss short, it goes like 30 to 40 yards down there. Next up, we have 7, which is 588. This was a brand new hole the last time they played the Open Championship here, and it got a little bit longer for this year's golf tournament, and you can't get any sort of appreciation for what's on the right side over here. You're talking about like I believe it's like a 50-foot, maybe even a little bit over a 50-foot tall sand dune to the right that completely obscures your view of the ocean. I mean, you might think like, oh, it's a nice ocean view. You can hear the waves crashing in the distance, but with that massive hill to the right, it is just spectacular to see. I think there'll be golf fans up there, if I remember correctly. This green was even more extreme in 2019. They did flatten it a little bit here for 2025, but still going to be a pretty good birdie look. In fact, probably even more of a birdie look this time because of the green not being as extreme. Hole 8 is 430, so this is a medium length par 4. This is one that I guess you could say is a birdie look, but because it's so tight, you're not going to have a wedge in unless you're forcing a driver down there, which is very dangerous. Driver brings that pop bunker to the right into play, and just like a lot of the rest of the golf course where you can't really see just how high these dunes are or how extreme they are, you miss to the left, you're dead. There's some really deep stuff over there as well. You miss to the right, that's the bailout. I guess if you're going to hit driver, you're going to see a lot of people missing it in this right rough. There are a few spots that could be troublesome, but for the most part, you'd probably be okay over there. This hole, though, 90% of the field hits something less than driver. Just tries to squeeze it in between these pop bunkers. And it's still pretty scoreable if you're having about 140 in, but not nearly as easy as you would think on paper at 430. There's just a lot of risk and reward if you want to make it a wedge hole. 9 is 430 as well, so going back the other direction. And you can see almost the same thing we said about 8 here with hole 9. If you take on the driver, there's a pop bunker to the right that comes in play. And I would say the sloping here isn't as extreme as 8, especially towards the left side. You do have some deep grass that you want to avoid, but I think you're going to see some more drivers at 9 compared to 8. Next up, you have 10, which is 450 yards, dogleg from left to right. This is a less than driver hole for most of the field. It does play fairway, you can see they have it at 310, so I guess they're assuming a lot of people are going to hit driver, but it's a much wider landing area if you take less than driver here, and it is very penal to the right side. You can kind of see the sloping from the overhead view, which kind of tells you how extreme it is. And to the left, you have a bunch of deep rough. So most of the rough, like this stuff, is the 2-inch rough that they have listed on the greenskeeper sheet. But this stuff further left, the darker colored, is sometimes it's little hills, but in other cases, it's really long rough too. Next up, we have 11, which is 470 yards. This is a long par 4, dogleg from left to right. This will be one of the harder holes on property just because of how long it is, and it's a long iron into a tiny green. Next up, we have 12, which is 530. So after maybe, it'll be like either the second, maybe third hardest hole, I would say, this year. I think 4 is going to be the hardest with them adding length there, but 12 is the easiest hole that you have on the golf course. So 11 will be brutal. You'll be able to get one back at 12 if you hit the fairway there. Reachable for even the shortest players at only 530 yards. And then 13 is 192, so you kind of get hit over the head again right after the easy hole. This is a long par 3. It is adjacent to, I think it's like the 18th hole, or it's one of the ones towards the end of this golf course where it's right next to each other, adjacent greens. I believe a massive build out that's around this spot, so that'll be one of the more lively portions of the golf course. Next up, we have 14, which is 470. So this is another long, brutal par 4, and the bunkers are in play for even your longest players. So I like the length they added. Some of the tee boxes, by the way, aren't even updated on these overhead views, making them even more so in play than you might expect. Next up, we have a shorter par 4. This one played over par in all 4 rounds, though. So 8, 9, I think they played under par at times in 2019. But this hole, which looks even easier, I would say, on paper than you had at 8 and 9. Maybe it's because of the prevailing wind. I believe it's into the wind, and that may have been the reasoning for that. But you can't sleep on this hole, especially if the wind starts to whip. 16 is 234, so it does play downwind for most rounds, and it's a super long hole, but what you can't see here is towards the right side, and they call this Calamity. This is the most famous hole, in my opinion. My favorite hole at this golf course is about a 60 to 70 yard drop off. And when I mean it's a cliff towards the right side and it's not out of bounds, it's a literal cliff. If you hit it down there, you might be better off just re-teeing at that point and not trying to get out of it, because you're gonna have a hard time finding your golf ball. You're gonna have next to no chance to even get it up high enough towards the green complex. It is such a visually intimidating shot, especially towards these right side pins, that you'll see players bail out 40, 50 yards left. So I hope it's windy. I hope it plays maybe into the wind on Sunday. I don't know if the golf gods, the weather gods, can give us an exact opposite wind direction, but that would make that hole one of maybe the hardest test in golf that I've ever seen. 17 is 406 yards. This is potentially drivable too, especially with link soil if it doesn't rain. You'll see guys that drive it like 350 on this hole, so just in front of the green complex. I don't believe you've ever seen somebody, at least to my knowledge, that has hit the green. But especially because it plays downwind as well, you'll get some people that hit it right about where my cursor is there. And then finally, 18 is 474. So this is a super long finishing hole. One where a lot of people will hit less than driver, because if you hit driver, I mean, look how much it constricts the further up you get there, and it's all about the second shot. It's a extremely long shot, especially if you lay up off the tee. You can see it's adjacent to another hole over there too, so I like the close proximity on a lot of these. And the finishing hole is one of the top 5, one of the top 6 most difficult holes, but I would say that holes like 4, you have a few on the back 9 as well, those longer par 4s could play even more difficult than what you have right there. And now that we've seen the golf course, let's go through our modeling for this week. So exactly what I'm looking for in my plays, and I've got a lot of key stats that I'm incorporating. So the first 4, which we're not going to spend as much time on, would just be your core 4 shots gained metrics. So that's shots gained off the tee, approach, around the green, and your putting. I like looking at form over the last 24 rounds. They give us a pretty good sense of not only how somebody's playing recently, but also their baseline over the last month and a half, sometimes even a little bit longer for people that aren't playing as much. But it gives us a really good sense for, a player's season in general, their form over the last month or so, how they're trending heading into this major championship. What I will say, though, is that off the tee approach play is usually weighed a little bit more than the short game stats. But because this is a major championship, a difficult golf course, around the green and putting are pretty much on par with the off the tee and approach play this week. So I would say a little bit more of a balanced model than what we're used to seeing. But on top of that, what we're really going to focus on here are some of the niche stats that we have for this course. And first, I'm going to have driving distance, which, might not be maybe immediately apparent when you look at it, but with all the long irons in play and these long par fours that, the shorter players are going to have over 200 yards into, especially the ones that are into the wind, hitting the ball 300 plus yards is massive. And it's only 2-inch primary rough, so you can't spray it all over the world. That's why shots gained off the tee is still a pretty big factor in the model for this week. But driving distance, if we want to focus on one aspect, the distance or that accuracy, at least in my opinion, especially from the leaderboard in 2019, there was a clear distance bias at this golf course. Give me guys that hit the ball long and straight. So, Rory McIlroy would be a great example of somebody that can keep it on the planet and hit it a long way. Chris Gotterup, after his Scottish Open win, I guess you'd have to say that about him as well. He's been very accurate over the last couple months, or at least accurate for a bomber. But Bryson DeChambeau, who has that elite combination of distance and accuracy, are really going to get a big boost at this golf course. So that's something that I added on top of the core 4 stats. I'm also looking at fescue putting. So that would be, I narrowed it down to Open Championships, also the Renaissance Club, the home of the Scottish Open, to give us an idea of the best putters on the surface. Your winner from last time, Shane Lowry, was towards the top end of that list, so maybe not a massive surprise there. But you had guys like JT Poston, Elvis Smiley, Matt Fitzpatrick, Marto Penge, that really grayed out well in that category. In general, putting on fescue is so much different than the PGA Tour that I actually value this fescue putting stats maybe even more so than what we have for like bent grass or Bermuda grass on the PGA Tour. And the reason for that are that these greens are much slower. They have to run them at closer to 11 and a half on the stimp meter rather than getting closer to 12 and a half, even 13 like we see at some major championships. So you have to hit the ball harder. You can be more aggressive. Lag putting is a lot down to speed, not so much the undulations on greens that are this slow. And it's the exact opposite of a Augusta National, for example, where the greens are running fast, players can hardly hit it. They're so pure that they're just going to run on the slopes, on the arcs that you would expect. A lot of the guys that putt well at Augusta National, at golf courses like that, do not putt well on fescue. And like, for example, Scotty Scheffler, who's been great putting this year, atrocious on the greens at the Scottish Open. And it's not a massive surprise. If we find Scotty Scheffler, I'll just sort it by model score because he's number 1 this week, as you'd expect. World number 1, still grading out in a lot of other categories. But look at the fescue putting. He's losing almost a half a stroke per round. And that's despite him having elite tier course history around the Open Championship. So, it's going to help some guys. It's going to hurt some others. In the case of a Scotty Scheffler, I totally think he's finishing top 10 this week. Top 5 most likely, just because of how much he's going to wear out the course with the long iron play. It's massive around here. But at the same time, I worry about his upside when he can't seem to gain a whole lot of strokes on these fescue greens. So I'm sure at some point he'll figure it out. When he does, he will probably win the Open Championship that year. But players that have shown us the ability to putt on the surface, especially the ones that are gaining over a stroke per round, if you can find any semblance of ball striking form, are going to be grading out quite well this week. So for example, Matt Fitzpatrick is top 5. Shane Lowry is still top 10, despite him not even having the best form over the last month or so. It's a pretty big leg up in the model for me this week. Next up, we've got approach play from 175 to 225. There's a metric fuck ton of long iron shots at this golf course. Excuse my French, but there's no other way to put it. Almost every hole, other than maybe like 4 or 5 of them, you're going to have something from 175 plus. So focusing on the players that gain to their baseline in this range could be fruitful on a week like this. So you got Guido Migliozzi. He's a smaller sample size DP World Tour guy, but definitely somebody that checks that box. He's been somebody I've been following for 4 or 5 years at this point. Brooks Koepka, we know he's got elite tier long iron play. They love Phil so much, we got him on there twice. But Laurie Cantor, Sebastian Soderberg, Stuart Sink, Justin Suh, all players that gain in that category. I more so want to focus on the elite tier players just because they're on the PGA Tour. We have a bigger sample size with those guys. But like a Shane Lowry, that's another category where he's really excelled. So not a surprise that he won the last time that we played here. Hideki, you might want to keep an eye on him. And Daniel Berger really hits those long irons well. All players are going to get a boost as well. And the last couple key stats I'm looking at, first off, would be your scrambling. So that's just another way to look at around the green, which at a golf course, a links course that's this firm and fast, greens that are only like 5,000 square foot, that's almost Pebble Beach size, guys. It's a little bit larger than Pebble Beach, but still extremely small targets, especially compared to St. Andrews, which has 10,000 plus square foot greens. Around the green matters at a golf course like this. So, Matteo Manicero, Hillier, a lot of these DP World Tour guys are ranking out towards the top. But once we start to get to these PGA Tour players like a Harry Hall, a Fleetwood, a Scotty Scheffler, a Russell Henley, for example, that are routinely able to save par, that is going to be a skill, especially if it gets windy this week. So don't, sleep on around the green or scrambling at this major championship. And then rather than looking at specific comp courses, I'm using shots gained links for some of this comp course analysis, just because I don't think there's any courses on the PGA Tour or even really the DP World Tour, other than when they play at St. Andrews, that are good comp courses for this. And, if we use the DP World Tour stuff, you're missing out on all the PGA Tour guys. Even if we tried to find a PGA Tour course that made sense, we're missing out on them. However, if we look at the Renaissance Club and the Open Championship, they both have a fair chance to actually play in those kind of fields. So that's why I think it's by far the best thing to look at this event. Also the Renaissance Club, to try and find that comp course analysis. And it even lets us look at the Live Tour guys, because they, maybe not the Renaissance Club over the last few years, but they played at the Renaissance Club back in the day. Also these Open Championships. So when we look at that, you got Marco Penge at first, who is a small sample size popper. So it still matters, but you got to take it with a slight grain of salt. But Rory McIlroy, number one in the field, really, of the guys that have a big enough sample size to take seriously. Number two, though, Scotty Scheffler. And that's despite him losing these strokes on the fescue putting greens. All the shots gained links courses, by the way, have fescue putting. So it's a direct correlation between these two. If he figures it out and gains like a half a stroke putting per round, that would vault him a stroke up the shots gained links and would have him surpassing a Rory McIlroy. So I still think that there's some upside for Scotty, but he's got to figure out how to be more aggressive on these greens. They're slower. He's got to make that mental adjustment. And I think once he does, watch out, he's going to win this thing. You also have JT Poston, Terrell Hatton that grade out really well at these courses. Hatton, by the way, has won the DP World Tour event at St. Andrews. So that's part of the reason why he grades out well there. You also have Robert McIntyre, Højgaard, these DP World Tour specialists that you'd expect to see excelling at this style of golf course. Taylor Pendrith is another small sample size player. He played pretty well last week. You can see T13. He has no other sample size at Links Golf though. So, you want to do a little bit of deep diving, making sure that you're looking at players that have over, let's say 12 rounds plus would be ideal when we're looking at shots gained to links, but at the very least, 2 full events, 8+ rounds would be where I would start to take a lot of that data seriously. So a Chris Gotterup, for example, he does have a larger sample size. And, sure, the win last week was well over the 1.6 shots gained per round. But overall, he's been half decent at these courses, even outside of just that win. So the kind of players that'll get a boost in my modeling. And then overall, when we put it all together, number one, Scotty Scheffler. So that's not so much a surprise to anyone watching this. Marco Penge, maybe a little bit more of a surprise. He's super long off the tee. He fits that aspect. He's putting well in fescue. He's played well at links courses. A good scrambler. I mean, I know he's from the DP World Tour, but he really checks every box we're looking for. So you're not going to get that many complaints for me that he's a 10 out of 10. The only complaint for me would be in DFS is that he's going to be way too popular, at least for my liking. We don't have ownership projections quite yet as it's Monday, but I imagine he's going to be extremely highly owned in that kind of format. The better spot, though, would be maybe as a top 10 bet. I feel like that market, maybe head-to-heads, if you can find some 72-hole matchups against somebody that's shorter off the tee, maybe not as good of a course fit, maybe you can try and get some value in that market. But for DFS, the market might be a little bit saturated, I would say, especially after him nearly winning at the Scottish Open. But you have Rory at 3, who's the hometown hero. He's going to get steamed to absolute the moon because of some of that narrative stuff, but he really fits it well on paper as well. And he does have, course record level stuff at this course. So don't overlook that. Chris Gotterup, Matt Fitzpatrick, Ben Griffin, all players that round out that top 7. Also Harry Hall there at number 7. Shane Lowry, past champion at 8. You always like to see your past champions grading out well in the model. Kind of confirms a lot of the stats that we're looking at. And that's even with Shane Lowry not playing that well over the last 24 rounds. This is significantly working against him. A lot of the longer term stuff though is where he's popping into that top 10, which is important, right? Because this is the course fit stuff, and the course fit stuff is what pushed him into that top 10, which to me tells me that I'm modeling it the right way. Also, we've got Victor Hovland at number 9, Sepp Straka at number 10. A lot of these are recent form poppers, but McIntyre really fits this style of golf well. A Terrell Hatton really fits it well. I think it's a lot of the longer term stuff that's putting you onto a Terrell Hatton. Also decent form in the Live Tour, so you won't want to overlook that. I'm surprised Xander's only at number 20. I mean, he's played so well at the Genesis Scottish that I thought he might pop a little bit more, but you can see the long iron stats this year have not been there. Historically, he's a much better long iron player though, so if he can figure that out, watch out, because the rest of the form has at least been about a neutral, if not well into the positive for him, which to begin the year, he was a little bit hit or miss. He was, gaining in some categories one week and losing in others. Now he's starting to get back to that just, kill you with consistency sort of player that gains across all 4 stat categories. Post and Nick Taylor, potential sleeper plays. Shout out to my guy LSU Nick, who was already looking at Nick Taylor this morning, even before I saw that. And I think that's a sharp take, by the way. I think he's going to contend in a major at some point here soon. You got Justin Thomas, Corey Connors, Matt McCarty there at number 25. Giving you guys an idea of the kind of players that I'm looking at this week. Alrighty guys, that's all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already, and also comment down below what you've got as the winning score for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page, which is where I post all my modeling, all my projections for these events, whether it's for DFS, my entire player pool on Draftkings, or my outright bets, or my prop bets on Underdog and Prize Picks. All of that is covered on my Patreon page, so make sure to check that out if you guys haven't already for all of the extra content that I do for these golf tournaments, and also enter the free giveaway. It'll be on a first come, first serve basis, by the way. The first person to guess the correct winning score will win that free month of the Patreon. But that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck with all of your exposure this week. I'll have a betting and DFS preview dropping on a little bit later on this evening, so make sure you subscribe so you guys don't miss that when it drops. And also our Wednesday live streams, which will be getting you ready for all the action before lock. And that'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time on the Ship It Nation YouTube channel. That'll be the first live stream covering the DraftKings DFS side. And then at 8 p.m. Eastern time, that'll be on this YouTube channel right here, the Gsluke DFS one. We're doing the prop and betting side of things at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure to check out that. Best of luck, as I mentioned before. Enter the giveaway if you guys haven't already. And let's have ourselves an Open Championship week.